So Hashem Abedi, the terrorist who was convicted alongside his brother Salman as responsible for the Manchester arena bombing, has been involved in a prison attack. He and some others essentially attacked a number of guards with makeshift knives and threw boiling hot water over some of them. Tom, how the hell was this allowed to happen? Someone like Hashem Abedi is, someone who you would think would have all eyes on him every second of the day.
No, it's a spectacular failure of security within the prison system. He was in HMP Frankland. He somehow managed to get his hands on materials that he could sharpen up into knives effectively. He did throw this hot, I've seen cooking oil, also seen water reported. Whatever it is, it's done a horrendous amount of damage to 3 prison guards. They were inflicted with life-threatening injuries. Thankfully, they've all managed to make it through. How he was ever allowed access to any of this to begin with is crazy. Also, this isn't the first time he's attacked people in prison. I mean, it was a few years ago now where he and a couple of other Islamists had also attacked in a kind of frenzied attack a prison officer. And also, he's if not the most high-profile Islamist terrorist in the prison estate.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been moved to Belmarsh now. Why he wasn't there to begin with, I have absolutely no idea. He's serving, 55 years in prison for the role that he played with his now deceased brother Salman in the Manchester arena horror. It really speaks to the sort of profound naivety, complacency of the British state, I guess. And what's particularly chilling is that goes back throughout the whole story of the Abedes, really. I mean, the reason that they ended up in the UK in the first place was because his father, who was a sort of Libyan Islamist opponent of the Gaddafi regime, claims asylum here in the 1990s, where the Abedi children are born. When they start to come of age, Salman, Hashem, and also there's another brother called Ismail, clearly begin to show signs of radicalization. Hashem and Salman travel back and forth to Libya during the Libyan civil war, where they were clearly fighting with Islamist militias, learning how to shoot guns, learning how to build bombs. They were able to travel back to Britain entirely unchecked. I believe at one point even the British Navy intervened to bring them back when they got caught in a sticky situation while they were out there. Also, with the inquiries that went on into the Manchester arena, MI5 having to formally apologise because they found information that they didn't act upon in a timely enough fashion to stop that horrendous bombing from taking place. You just feel like from top to bottom, there has been this willful, perhaps not so willful, unwitting kind of naivety towards this particular family, which has led to not only 22 people losing their life back in 2017 on that horrendous night, but also now even prison guards just trying to do their job, finding themselves, slashed at and scalded because the state still hasn't learned its lesson. So just from top to bottom, I find it incredible.
Andrew, one of the sort of patterns or themes that we often see is that when it comes to Islamists, the state just sort of recoils. It's like, it's not that I'm not going to say that he's been given a soft touch because he's given 55 years in prison, but there is something about the way that why has he, someone responsible for one of the worst attacks on children, and yet is still not in a complete maximum security prison.
Well, I think, as Tom says, it does speak to a broader problem, and there are all sorts of problems with Islamist gangs within prisons, forcing other inmates to convert and threatening them with their life if they don't. It sounds like that is not being tackled. We don't know the full extent of the problem, but we know that there is a problem and it's very, very serious. And there is a general sense, isn't there, that the Islamist threat is just not really taken seriously, or it does not receive the attention that it requires because of this fear of being accused of being racist. I think that's ultimately what it is. MI5, I think it's 75% of MI5's work is taken up on the threat from Islamist terrorists. And yet we are continually told that the problem is the far right, is white nationalists and that kind of thing. I'm not saying they're not a problem. They're definitely a problem, but they're nowhere near the problem that radical Islamism is. Same in Germany. The politicians are continually saying that the far right is the problem when people are getting stabbed every week, like by Islamists. So people can see that this is a problem and no one wants to tackle it. Now, why is that? I mean, I think there's the intersectional element. There's a sense in which Muslims are high up on the oppression hierarchy, and therefore we mustn't offend them. But God, that to me is more offensive to Muslims because you're basically saying that you should be defined by the worst aspects within your community. I think ultimately this has to be dealt with. People have to take the threat of radical political Islamism very, very seriously because these are people who think that there's nothing better, nothing more glorious than murder, than mass murder, and they will continue to do this. So I think all of this stuff with this guy in prison and their failure to sort of really reckon with it does speak to a much bigger problem of in the West, of us failing to deal with this issue.
Yeah.
Because either we're too afraid, because obviously the ramifications can be very violent, very unpleasant, but also that we don't want to admit that there is clearly a problem going on, and if we address it, like with the grooming gang situation, we might be accused of being racist all over again. It's not good enough.
Yeah, people would rather cover up or ignore the threat than confront it directly.
And like hiding in plain sight doesn't cover it where the Abedes are concerned. You know, they were the children of himself, a kind of radical Islamist militia man. There were various points in which, as I say, they were travelling back and forth to Libya during the civil war. Various reports coming from particularly Salman Abedi's school, where he was beating up girls because of the length of their skirt. There was widely expressed concerns that he'd clearly been radicalised towards ISIS in particular, and yet time and again, these aren't even red flags. These are huge, signals going up that something was wrong here, and yet it wasn't addressed.
So why does that happen? I mean, why is it the case that you can have some? I mean, this guy went to Libya twice, didn't he? Right. So fighting with Islamists, right? So I mean, I love the tradition of Britain taking in people seeking asylum in need, right? But at what point do you say, actually, let's not take in criminals, let's not take in people who are associating with Islamist terrorists? You know, surely that should be a kind of. I mean, you can see what's happened in Sweden. This is exactly what's happened. Is there hasn't been a robust form of liberalism applied. So they've sort of just accept. I mean, there's that guy in Sweden who attacked that 91-year-old woman, almost killed her, and he'd committed multiple crimes since receiving asylum in Sweden, including going to prison for rape. At what point do you say, okay, you can go then? We don't want you in this country because you're a criminal and a would-be a rapist and killer of old women. Like, so I just don't understand this idea that you would not robustly vet and demand high standards from people seeking asylum. You know, there should be those standards applied in terms of you're going to have to assimilate. Yeah. You know, when you go to America and become a citizen, you have to learn about the history of the country and pass a test, right? I think our test should be, you shouldn't be a criminal and you shouldn't be involved with a terrorist group. Is that too much to ask?
Is that really so high a bar?
Not really.
Crazy.
Yeah.